Moving on to the next question, uh, I think while we are all bullish about the growth that's going to come, I think it's important to understand that while we all believe that we are here to make travel easier, there are this not so good events that happen around us, yeah, and those do pose challenges, and at many a times it becomes a blanket to kind of look at everything through the same prism. So from your point of view, and Martin, I'll probably pick you first there, do you believe that travel from India going forward is going to become easier or is it going to become harder?
I have no doubt it's going to become easier because just because of the technologies we have in place, we are constantly focusing on how to, one of the things that we're fortunate to have in our visa regime is we have the 10-year visa. And that really eases up the travel and facilitates travel to the US for a legitimate traveler for 10 years. Frankly, we don't have to see them again here. When we're processing over 1,500 applicants just over here alone, it's nice not to know that that person isn't coming back for 10 years. Enjoy your time in the US. So I think it's going to become easier. Like I mentioned, we have the pre-clearance that's going on in Abu Dhabi. It's a constant thing we're looking at. Like for instance, it's not the Indian market, but China, for instance, we went from a 1-year visa to a 10-year visa, and introduced certain schemes to address certain issues that we were looking at from a security standpoint. But nevertheless, we were able to do that by looking closely, like, okay, how can we keep our borders protected, but still facilitate and ease the travel of, for instance, in this case, with Chinese travelers, right? So I see this constantly evolving towards ease because that's what we're hearing for travel partners. That's what we're hearing in the U.S. government. You hear that from tour organizers. It's a huge industry that we need to respond to, and we do try. And even upon arrival, I think as the U.S. looks at increasing the ease of arrival into the U.S. at the port of entry, you're going to see, I feel you're going to see more and more of those programs expand, in that bureaucratic government sort of way, which, can be kind of glacial sometimes, but still, I think it's going to keep moving forward that direction.
Thank you. Colin, I'm going to pick this up with you, and here's the specific reference. I know it's a little premature to talk about Brexit. Yeah, but do you see this changing in light of Brexit?
No, fundamentally, I don't. We're still working through the implications of Brexit, as I'm sure you appreciate. But fundamentally, the customer journey doesn't change. They required a visa before; they require one again. There's increased realization and focus in the UK that it is almost like a service we're providing. People pay for it and they want a good quality service, and there's renewed focus or greater focus on the customer journey. So we've made significant changes of improvements to the online process. Our Access UK portal has been significantly upgraded to be more intuitive. And there's the move as well to digitalise more, less reliance on papers, for our visa officers trawling through papers. If we can make everything more online, we're introducing scanners in a number of our VACs, so we're scanning far more documents. And that gives us greater flexibility as to where we actually process applications. So you were talking about pinch points and how we manage our peak periods. At the moment, we've succeeded through good forecasting, but there's a limit to how many visa officers you can have squashed in the visa section. So going digital creates that option of sending it either to different regions or back to the UK, which is something that we're actively looking at. But as far as Brexit goes, I suppose one kind of plus point for India as the value of the pound has dropped. So we've kind of factored that into our forecasting. We are hoping that that will encourage more tourists to the UK. So,
Andrea, I'm going to pick you here. I heard from Colin, he actually spoke about the price for the visa, and we also heard about outsourcing. We heard about technology, and all of that in some form drives the price. Do you see actually the cost of the visa coming down?
I don't know if the price will go down. What is the price for European citizens to come to India?
I think that's
Schengen visa is 60 euro, and after you must you have to add the price for VFS, and in VFS, if you want to have a fast track, you can go in a special living room. You take a seat, you take a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and some sweets, and people take care of you. You need to add maybe 1,000 or 2,000 rupee more, but it is a VIP service, like in a plane. I don't think the price is very high. And if you go to Schengen for 1 week or for 5 years, you pay the same price. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin, if I pick that point with you, what's your view though?
well, you're putting me on the spot now, aren't you? The only thing I can say is that our visas are valid for 6 months rather than 3 months, and they're obviously multiple entry and access to Ireland as well, so they still constitute good value for money. For regular travellers, I would always recommend applying for a longer term visa. If you are a regular traveller, then it does work out cheaper. If you're asking me whether the price is going to go down, I doubt it.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question to the panel, and for this, I'll move to Dr. Norbert. Given the growth projections from India, are you looking at something more in terms of technology? Are you looking at more in terms of people? And how are you approaching this entire, how are you going to grow the facilitation service out of India? I mean, expansion plans, technology, people, how do you see this panning out over the next 2 to 3 years, considering the growth opportunity that you see coming from India to your markets?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and you have several aspects to it, and even I can go back a little bit to this price question you raised, because there are some tricks to the Schengen region, if I can share you with some practical advices. I mean, of course, there's one trick that any changes in the Schengen region and the Schengen system, I mean, we are a single system, but of course, each and every member state, European member states, has its own interpretation how to implement actually the Schengen rules, which we try to make it as single and as common as possible. However, it's something like this, like in India, when all the 29 states of India has to agree on something without any vote. I mean, can you imagine how difficult it is? That it's the same difficulties in the European Union with our Schengen countries to agree any changes, for example, price changes or anything. However, we do have in our interpretation, in that sense, that sort of a gradual approach. So if you see travelers are more frequent travelers who actually been genuine travelers for several times, that we can always give longer and longer visas, which means for the same price you will get longer stay or multiple stay in the same region. In a way, that could be considered as a sort of compromise and price change. Going back to the question that you asked for technology, I think that is very important. We don't even see how technology will develop in the next coming years, and it's so fast changing that we really have to live up to it to deal with it. And in our service, what we provide, I think we also have to be very up to date and then to use these present day technologies, because not just issuing visas, but also, I mean, booking your flight tickets, having your accommodation and so everything, it could be on your mobile phone and even other gadgets that you all run. And I think it's very important that at our process and procedure, we also use all this technical development in the same time. I mean, we have to be up to date because our clients, the travelers, they are going to be up to date. And particularly in India, if you see them, that really they are the most advanced technologies what they are using. Those middle-class travelers, but our main market, definitely they are. So I think we have to follow them, and then we try our best to do so. Also, we have whenever we see the growing numbers, and we see the growing numbers. I didn't bore you with all the numbers, and I didn't say that you bored it, but we, more or less, it's very important to have all these numbers because more or less we have the same trends. Not as big numbers, we are different size of country, but we have the same trends, and then we see even more opportunities. So I think for us, technology is one of, if not the only solution. If we can live with it and we can use it rightly to deal and cope with these huge numbers, what we are expecting here.
Thank you. Martin, your views on that?
Yeah, we issue a visa for 10 years for $160. There you go. But yeah, I mean, and I think, and that is, and actually, it's partly a big part of that too is really its workload, and as I think you see these workloads growing because there are more travelers and that sort of thing. So, and definitely the value for money is a big deal. We're going to keep seeing growth from India for sure. Without a doubt. We're not seeing the same kind of growth as we did the year before, but that we've had like 5 years of really huge growth prior to this year. But this year we were still doing a lot of numbers. So I mean, I do have to say, yeah. So if you're considering your travel, $160 for 10 years. All due respect to my colleagues here in the days.
On the point of technology, and I just want this for the group to kind of comment on, we've been seeing this mobile biometrics and this kiosk facilities that's kind of been experimented in parts of the market. Do you see that as a trend that will emerge going forward? And is that one way to ease the entire process around getting visas? Andre?
Like said Norbert, we are together and we go ahead. When we speak about technology, technology is a part of security. And in Schengen countries, we have no space between our countries about security. Of course, we have a kind of competition. Our countries, in the back, we have workers and okay. But about security, we have a very, very good how to say, a message. We exchange every day about information about security. Yes, when we speak about business, about technology, one thing, every time I don't understand why we make a difference between touristic visa and business visa. Because when Indian businessmen go to France, they don't go only to work. And on the paper, it's the same, I can say. And even people go to make business, he say he go for tourism. And it's, then maybe we have in Schengen to work about it, to have, maybe they have good reasons to ask that. But for me, it's the same. About technology, about movement of people, about movement of business, I can say in France here we invest more than 20 billion of euro. We are the third country to invest in India, and we create more than 350,000 jobs in India. It's a big thing. Then technology, of course, we are there. We have big companies in India. We are together to work for technology, many kind of technology. And we are together, sure.
Thank you. Colin, any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a competitive market, really, and I think you have to keep thinking of innovative ways to make that, to make it easier for customers, to apply for visas. So the mobile biometric kiosks, that's one aspect of it, and obviously, as our technology improves, access to it, we're looking at other options like e-visas, down the road. But I think there's basically a fundamental change in how we look at the customer. We used to call them applicants a few years ago, but now they're customers, and it's that realization that you have to appeal to the customer, which I think is key, and all of these ideas are welcome, I think.
If I may say something, I mean, and that's a real challenge. I mean, because for us, we want to facilitate the visas. I think the off-site biometric collections has helped. That's been a big deal for us. But at the same time, for instance, our process is a 2-day process. You go for 1 day for the biometrics, the next day or a subsequent day for the interview process. And that's something that's frankly still, not ideal, right? Ideal would be 1 day you get everything, at least for us. So those are challenges that we're constantly looking at because, like Colin mentioned, just looking at the customer experience. We want to make this as easy and as seamless as possible to make the United States an attractive destination for tourists. So yeah, those things are really key. It's one of the things that we always, I'm asked about frequently about the visa process. Like, can I do it in 1 day? And we have to we can do that in certain circumstances. We'll do that. But that's pretty rare. That's not a normal thing. It would be great to get to a point where we can do everything, but I don't know what the future holds on that. But I think just that using that technology to facilitate that would be the next wave, I suppose.
Thank you. I'd like to open the panel for the guests here to ask any questions if they have.
A question for you. When you spoke about the US visas, does it include only your tourist visas or it also includes the student visas?
Are you talking about numbers or?
Numbers, yeah.
Oh, yeah, numbers. Those would be
you said you saw this year was not as good as the previous years.
Oh, well, it's basically I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head. I'm looking at Rachel over here, who's my colleague. It's up. Okay, so students are up, right? Yeah, because we just actually had we actually have a record number of Indian students in the United States right now. And in terms of processing, what we saw was, when you're talking 900,000 applicants in a year, really flatlining at staying at 900,000 is still a lot of visa applications. So yeah, I won't say that it went down, but I would say that it pretty much stayed at the same very, very healthy levels, to the extent that we've had to bring in temporary personnel to help us with the workload, because we were also very conscious of our wait times. I'm sure everybody deals with that sort of thing, because we don't want it to extend too long.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, I think we've shared thoughts, and I'm thankful to each one of you all on the dais here to bring a perspective to how each one of you look the travel opportunity from India and the kind of measures that you are taking to ease the travel process out from India, at the same time securing your respective borders. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahesh, Ms. Ramakopa, Dr. Norbert, Mr. Andre, Mr. Martin Opus, and Mr. Colin Jones. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are actually bang on schedule, so we can take a half-an-hour tea break. Tea is right outside. So if we can be back in the room at 4:15, so we can start the second session. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming in. We are a few minutes late, so we'll try to catch that up on panel 2. I'd like to announce the second panel, the topic, the next wave of Indian global travelers, making the most of the growing India outbound market opportunity. These are the challenges and best practices to promote outbound travel and tourism. May I first invite our moderator for this panel, Vishal Suri, Managing Director of SOTC Travel Services. Along with him, may I also take this opportunity to invite the panelists, Ms. Sheetal Munshaw, Director Atour France, Mr. Urs Eberhard, Head of Market Switzerland Tourism, Mr. GB Sridhar, Regional Director South Asia, Middle East, Africa, Singapore Tourism, and Mr. Nishant Kashikar, Country Manager, India and Gulf Tourism Australia. Vishal, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to welcome my esteemed panelists. Thanks, Abe, for introducing and setting the context and giving us the topic, the next wave of Indian global travelers, making the most of the large and growing India outbound market opportunity. I thought it's a good idea to start by introducing my panelists who are flanking me on both the sides. And I'll start with Urs. It's in no order of priority actually, but Urs, because he took the longest flight from Zurich to come and be with us all the way. Urs has been with Swiss Tourism since 1989, handling various markets including the key source markets like North America and the UK. He's currently based in Zurich head office and is responsible for all the markets. So he heads the markets. The next panelist is Mr. Nishant Kashikar. On my right, Nishant is the country manager for Tourism Australia, has over 18 years of work experience. 12 of them are in the travel industry. Prior to this, he has been with Kuoni, Thomas Cook, as well as Abbott, and handled the marketing division for them. So he has a very, very well-rounded CV and would be able to give us the perspective for both the tour operator as well as the tourism board perspective. Yeah. Sridhar GB, the regional director of Singapore Tourism Board, on my extreme left. He heads the South Asia, Middle East and Africa, which is a very, very large portfolio and a large geography to handle. Sridhar has held various positions within STB. He was the area director for India between 2010 and 2013. So he already is well aware of what India is capable of producing. Prior to his current role, he headed brand campaigns team at STB's headquarters, marketing in the marketing group as the regional director. So he's come back to India as the regional director for the Singapore Tourism Board. And very recently, Sridhar has just moved in recently about a few months back. And on my immediate right is Sheetal Munshaw. Last but not the least, she's the director of Atour France. Sheetal holds the distinction of being the first non-French national to be appointed as country director of Atour France globally. And talk about women power. So she has over a decade of experience in the travel and tourism industry and was the deputy director of Atour France in India in 2004 and 5. Prior to her starting her own representation company, and now she is back in the tourism board. Thank you to each one of you for coming and joining me on this panel. To set the context for our subject and the topic, I think India outbound market has been growing consistently over the years. There is an often mentioned UNWTO report which predicts that India will contribute to about 50 million outbound travelers in 2020. We are almost on the cusp of 2017. In 2015, we had about 20 million outbound travelers, which was a growth of about 11% over 2014. So the market has been growing quite at a good clip. The GDP of the country is growing at a steady 7%. We are quite stable in terms of the political stuff, except for the development on 8th, which has led to a little bit of turbulence, but otherwise we've been quite a steady state space, and we believe that we'll continue to grow at about 7% plus. The consumption story in India is driven largely by the composition of its population. 65% of the population is born after 1980. We have about 440 million millennials. We have over 390 million Gen Z, which are the people born post 2000 and will be the next set of consumers as far as travel and other consumption categories are concerned. Urban middle class is expected to cross 500 million mark by 2025. The population size coupled with better education is the key driver for growth of the country's purchasing power. There is a perceptible growth in the new emerging groups, and I will ask my panelists to speak about them at a later stage. The growth of women business traveler, which are growing, which is currently at about 25% of the total business travel. Rise in the senior travelers to about 7.3 million by 2013, and this is likely to drive the consumption of the luxury travel. The HNI segment is expected to grow six-fold by 2030. And then we are talking about essentially two distinct categories of Indian travelers, both at the top end and the bottom end of the income pyramid, who will drive the consumption for travel. It's also estimated that India will be the world's 5th largest economy behind China, US, Japan, and Germany by 2025. So all the prospects, it's a very, very attractive growth potential. There's a recent study by Goldman Sachs which says that, which was on the subject of rise of the Indian young consumer, which identifies two primary reasons. One is the 65% of the population is born post 1980, and second is the growth in connectivity and mobility. Smartphone users are slated to touch a number of 200 million in 2016, which is about a 67% growth over last year. So there will be connectivity, the younger population. A lot of this will drive the dynamics of growth for outbound travel in India. I will move on to my first set of questions to my panelists now. The outbound opportunity is immense. There is a phenomenal growth. It has attractive growth potential, and we have seen the commitment of the tourism boards who have set up offices in India for a long time. Most of them have a decade-old presence within India. Some of the tourism boards have already set up, and I know Australia has a 2020 strategic plan for India. However, my first question, I will go to Urs on my left. How does the country India rank versus the other source countries, and what steps are being taken to win the Indian traveler? And I also want you to bring in the prospect of the tier 2 markets in India, Urs. Over to you.
Absolutely, thank you very much. We have been pretty much one of the first foreign tourist offices setting up office in India, because there is a long-standing love affair between the two countries. We're very, very proud to be almost 20 years now in this country, and it has always been a very strategic, important source market. Currently, it is number 8 of all our incoming markets, but it's well ahead of markets such as Japan or ahead of Russia. And it's also ahead of the Netherlands. So we have more Indians in Switzerland than Dutch people. And we're very proud of that fact. And in terms of our offices, we have 2 offices, one in Delhi and one in Mumbai. 6 people are working full-time to promote Switzerland in this country very successfully. Last year we had a growth of 22%, and we are looking at India as one of those very, very strong growing markets. We have a set of, we have 3 market groups, and one of those market groups is the strategic growth markets. And India belongs to the strategic growth markets. We do every year a market study where we look in which market do we get the best return on investment. And we just completed that study in August of 2016, and India is number 3. So Switzerland is the market with the best return on investment. So every franc we invest in Switzerland gets the best return. The second is the US, and the third is India. So with all that, it is definitely clear that we are continuing our work here in India, going into basically two groups of potential travelers. One is the first-time traveler that travels in a group. And this is mostly 2nd and 3rd tier cities. So there it is definitely, we want this desire to see the most beautiful country in the world after India, which is Switzerland. We want them to come to Switzerland to see the icons they know. They want to go and touch snow. They want to go up to the Jungfrau. So this is 2nd and 3rd tier cities, and there really it's group travel. It's people, they want to have their Indian food when they travel. But we also work on a young, urban, middle class that is not so dependent on main season, that travels a little bit outside of main season, a middle class, a young urban class that is much more active, also physically active, that wants to do paragliding, that is also trying Western food, so there's not actually looking for Indian food, but really try Western food. And there we focus on that new clientele, because they might think that Switzerland is a boring place. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland is quite a sexy, good place to visit.
I agree. Thanks, Urs, for bringing in that aspect. I will move to Sridhar, and I think, Sridhar, we want you to talk about the importance of India as a source market, and essentially the question remains the same. But are there any specific segments that you are looking at from within India to travel to Singapore, and how are you focusing on them?
First of all, good afternoon to all of you. And I think for India as a source market for Singapore, we go back a long way. So we were looking at, recently we clinched 2 Bollywood movies, right? So one was Dear Zindagi, and the other one is with Dharma Productions, Badrinath Ki Dulhania. So in the context of trying to figure out how far back has Bollywood movies gone, we realized that way back in 1960, there was actually a movie called Singapore with Shami Kapoor in the movie. And there was actually a song there, Hey Rasa Sayang, and so on and so forth. So the realization is for Singapore, India is a key market for about 5 decades. So looking at 2015 numbers, India was our 5th largest visitor arrival source market at 1.014 million visitors. It was a record year last year, by the way. So it was great for us that finally we breached the 1 million mark in terms of visitor arrivals. And importantly, India is the 3rd largest tourism receipts generating market, right? At 1.17 billion Singapore dollars. It contributes to about 7% of our tourism receipts. So India is a very, very important market. And as Urs said, it's a very important strategic market for us. In terms of segments that we are after, Singapore is very firmly entrenched as a destination among the Indians. So if today we look at the number of awards, so recently all the awards we've won, we have realized that practically every year there's the Family Destination Award. Somehow or other Singapore is in the top ranking. So families are going to be continuing to be a very important segment we're going to go after. But we are also moving into other segments like working millennials. Singapore continues to be a very exciting place for nightlife, for women travel, for couples, double income, no kids kind of travel. So we are going to go after that segment. Cruise, Singapore welcomes the largest source market for cruise, apart from the Singaporeans, is our Indians, right? So whether it's Star Cruise or Royal Caribbean, the Indian traveler coming to Singapore for cruise is high. So I think that's going to be important. Meetings and incentives is another segment that is very important. So there are several segments that we are looking at. And Singapore, the strategy for India is trying to do more of these segments, trying to get into the tier 2 cities, because I think the tier 2 cities, whether it's Hyderabad or Calcutta, they are contributing many of the new travelers coming into Singapore. So our imperative in the coming years is to try and reach out to more of these travelers from other parts of India. Yeah. So maybe I'll stop here first and then move on to Nishant and Sheetal.
I think you made a lot of good points, Sridhar, and I will now move the same question across to Sheetal. And it's quite topical that Sridhar spoke about the Bollywood and the influence that it has on the consumers, and how destinations are using Bollywood to actually communicate with their potential travelers. And there are destinations like Tourism New Zealand, which has got Siddharth Malhotra. We have Switzerland, which is signed up with Ranveer Singh now. There is Befikre, which is a Yash Raj production movie which is coming in, which has been shot entirely in Paris, I am told. So how is it that France is looking at India as a source market to attract the new set of travelers?
Firstly, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Vishal. Thank you very much, Thomas Cook, for organizing a platform like that and for having me here. So to answer your question, as far as Bollywood is concerned, I'm almost tempted to say that while we're speaking about destinations that are like Singapore and Switzerland historic, as far as India is concerned, France is in a moment of making history with India, if I can call it that, because it's been some very interesting times for us. Like you rightly said, this is the first ever that there's been a Bollywood film, that too by Yash Raj Films, that has been shot entirely in France. So 80% of it was shot in Paris, and some parts of it in Picardy and in Cannes. So we're very, very happy and proud about that, and we hope that it'll be a very interesting showcase. I think a lot of reasons have prompted that. One is, I would say that the rules and regulations that were put in by Film France and the government of France in terms of the rebates, that were instated have become much more attractive than they used to be. The visa process has become a lot more seamless, and I think these, logistical and very, I would say, critical elements have contributed towards this. In addition to, of course, the natural attractiveness of France as a destination, because it really is. A world in a country, it has so many different facets to offer, as you know, and that compounded with these elements, of instating, I would say, rebates as well as making the visa process easier has definitely added to that. How we intend to use this, very interesting, sort of example would be that we went the whole hog, and since we had this first film being shot in France, we got together with Yash Raj Films, the mayor of Paris, the embassy, and we actually had the trailer, the rushes launched in Paris at the Eiffel Tower. So this was also a first ever that a Bollywood film has actually been launched in an international destination. It was Paris, and the sheer views were 29 million views that were generated out of the trailer alone. So it's very impactful, and we definitely intend to continue to ride that wave in that direction.
Sheetal, on the segments that France is looking to target from India, so if you can just touch on that part also.
Sure, I think it's also to do with it's an evolution of the Indian traveler that has led us to evolve in our strategy as well. So I would say if we throw back 10 years ago, when we started out, actually the journey began but also ended at the Eiffel Tower. So we were really brought down to the Eiffel Tower, which is iconic, but I would look at it as really the beginning, and now it has become that. So today we see Indians and Indian tour operators, travel agencies actually looking at Paris, but also Paris and beyond. So that's really our mantra. We're really looking at experiential travel. All our campaigns are in sync with that. So for the last 3 years, we had Be There, Do That, and now we're moving into Made in France, which is essentially authentic experiences, which I think the Indian traveler is now ready to experience, to go into regional France, to look at both, on the one hand, our global strategy of Marque Mondiale, which is signature tourism brands. We actually feel that there are so many regions in France that resonate in the minds of not just the Indian consumer, but the consumer by and large, be it Champagne, be it Paris, be it Bordeaux, and we've decided to leverage on those tourism brands and make that our strategy. And on the other hand, it is also the pôle d'excellence, or our areas of competence, which are, of course, wine and gastronomy, which would be mountains as well, the Alps, and several others that we're looking to leverage to combine both of these, and the segments naturally that follow would be in addition to the GIT, who also is stepping outside of Paris. So there is Paris and more. The incentives which are also doing Paris but differently, but also looking at other destinations. And then, of course, the largest traction, I would say, is the FIT. I think both Urs and Shrithar have already discussed in detail about the different FIT niches that we're looking at. The other segments that have grown for us, of course, is Bollywood, as we discussed, and the wedding segment. So France is becoming a popular destination for weddings. This is not something that we even had, I think, dreamt of, a couple of years ago. But today, France is on the map. We've just concluded a wedding of about 800 people in Monaco. So we see that, yes, it does match with the aspirational values. On the other hand, we've also launched things like the first ever massive online program for the French suppliers to acclimatize them with the Indian traveler specificities. We've even launched a wedding guide, which is a destination guide, which actually takes you into the intricacies, not just of the logistics, but also the cultural nuances of what it really takes to plan out an Indian wedding. So that's also a very interesting shift that we've seen.
Thanks, Sheetal. I think you made a lot of very comprehensive answer on the segment part especially, and you spoke about gastronomy, and that brings me to my next panelist. And Tourism Australia ran a Restaurant Australia campaign, and how successful was that campaign from that market perspective, Nishant?
I guess, the birth of Restaurant Australia took place based on a research undertaken by Tourism Australia called the Consumer Demand Project. And we asked almost 1,500 Indians in terms of, when you think of a holiday, what are the parameters that come to your mind? The first one was obviously safety and security. That's of paramount importance. Indians being Indians, the second one was value for money. The third reason for going on a holiday was world-class scenic beauty. And the fourth reason, to a surprise, was world-class food and wine experiences and local produce. We'd also seen a trend where, people who had been to Australia rated Australia's food and wine to be better or much higher than people who haven't been to Australia. So that gave us a kind of a marketing opportunity. The third reason, which we feel is equally important, is the popularity of Australia's MasterChef, or MasterChef Australia in India, where the chefs were literally worshipped in the kitchens by Indian women, gave us the confidence that we can safely go ahead and exploit this particular territory. The fourth and the important fact was taking into consideration that the number of television shows that focus on food these days, and also the number of television channels that have given birth which focus on food. So I guess we were confident that we would never go wrong with this particular strategy, and it was a great differentiator. When everyone's having a turtle in the advertisement and spectacular beaches, it was a great strategy to talk about some of the world-class food and wine experiences and position Australia as the culinary capital of the world over our traditional counterparts, like France and Italy. So for Indians who have been to Australia, they've rated Australia's food and wine to be the best in the world. And we've seen a shift in terms of a perception ever since the launch of this particular campaign, where Australia, among those who didn't travel, Indians who didn't travel to Australia, rated Australia's food and wine as number 7. But when post our campaign, it was they ranked it as the 3rd best destination in the world. Also, over the last couple of years, and significantly in 2015, 2016, we have seen the expenditure by Indians on food and wine going up by 51%. And Indians are now spending almost close to $127 million just on food and wine. That's almost 12 to 15% of the total spend. Now, having said that, it was, as a part of our campaign, we just didn't promote about great hotels and restaurants where you should dine, but it was a more tourism immersive experiences. It was all about a private island picnic on one of the islands of the Great Barrier Reef, and you can start imagining these great destinations that Australia has to offer. It was all about a breakfast with the kangaroos and the koalas. It was dining against the spectacular backdrop of the Sydney Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. It was dining in a colonial tramcar restaurant, so on and so forth. So, so we didn't focus on the restaurants out of Australia, but it was more of a tourism-driven experiences that helped us to promote this in India. And the most important part of this was the trade engagement strategy as well, because we launched a Restaurant Australia inspired itineraries working together with the trade in India, and these are all culinary experiences that were promoted out here. And over the past 12 months, I would say, there was Sanjeev Kapoor who did a 17-episode travelogue in Australia focusing on food. We had Vicky Ratnani did around 16 episodes on food and wine in Australia, and Ranveer Brar did almost 70 videos on Twitter recently. So a lot of UGC content that was generated over the past 12 months that helped us to position Australia as one of the leading culinary destinations of the world.
Thanks, Nishant. I think very interesting, and I just wanted, I mentioned earlier that Tourism Australia already has a 2020 strategic plan on India. In a world that we live in, which is a VUCA world as we call it, how do you take such a long position or a strategic position on a destination like India, and how important it is for you, and how close are you to that strategic vision?
Good question. Now let me share an interesting trend that we've seen happening around us. And I've termed this trend as a 55-25-5 trend. So what is this 55-25-5 trend? Now, some of us are part of the great Indian middle class, almost 300 million population. And the trend that we've seen happening in the great Indian middle class is the fact that the first generation, or our parents, took their first international holiday at the age of 55. Our generation, the second generation, took our first international holiday at the age of 25. And our kids, who's the third generation, have taken the first international holiday at the age of 5. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that Indians are traveling at a much younger age. And by the time they start earning, our kids start earning, they would have ticked off many destinations on the bucket list already. So it's the sheer potential that this market has to offer enticed us to launch an India-specific strategy. And what it gives us is a kind of a direction where we are headed, what's the potential that this market has to offer, and what is it that we need to do to get a larger share of this particular market. So the India 2020 plan essentially has got 3 objectives. The first objective was to double the arrivals from India to Australia. So from a level of 150,000 tourists, we feel that we should easily cross around 300,000 by the end of the decade. The second objective was to increase the spend. So from almost a $750 million, which is what Indian tourists contribute to the Australian economy, we felt that there's a potential to increase that up to $1.9 billion by the end of the decade. And the third objective was to increase Australia's out-of-region ranking out of India. So we were number 9 when we launched the plan, and the task was to be among the top 6, which we already achieved last year, well ahead of its time. In terms of the progress that we have made, from almost 150,000, we have reached 250,000 in just 4 years. We have 5 years to go, and we have just 50,000 tourists to achieve. And I guess we should achieve that target by 2017, 2018, if not earlier. And so we need to grow at around 5 to 6% if we have to bridge that gap over the next 5 years. And in terms of spend, we need to grow at around 12%. And I guess we are confident in terms of exceeding that target or achieving that target well before its time. So, yeah.
So India continues to help you all deliver your targets well in time.
Absolutely. I mean, that's been the perception so far. But, there's also a philosophy of India's economic progress has been described as a walk of a drunken man. 2 steps forward, a pause, 1 step sideways, 1 step backward, and maybe 2 steps forward again. So the future looks promising. The future is quite optimistic. And I guess if you have to invest on any one particular market, it is this particular market.
Okay, well said. I will move to my next question actually, which is essentially around the challenges and some of the best practices that I would want the panelists to talk about. Fundamentally, for the leisure travel or for that incentive travel, there are 4 key factors. One is the proximity of the destination, availability of affordable flight connectivities, prevailing or ease of visa regime, and the imagery of the destination in the market. So my question back again to Nishant is that Australia as a destination is not favorably placed on 2 out of these 4 parameters or 4 of these factors. So what is it that the tourist office was thinking of? How were you trying to overcome these factors when you were focusing on India?
So aviation is the key. It's clearly a game changer, and unfortunately you cannot take a boat or swim down to Australia. So this is quite critical towards the achievement of our overall 2020 objective. Now, the way we work is that globally we realized the power of aviation. And just to throw some stats, when between 2004 and 2008, when Qantas used to operate daily direct, or rather twice a week, direct flights from Sydney to Mumbai, arrivals grew at an average of 22% year on year. When Qantas discontinued those operations due to commercial reasons, our growth fell to almost 8 to 9%. And with Air India commencing the operation in September 2013, we have seen the growth coming back almost 19%. So there's a direct correlation between arrivals and aviation connectivity. And keeping that in mind, we have global MOUs with almost over 20 carriers. And these MOUs are not just agreements on co-funding of marketing activities, but it involves media visits, and it involves broadcast agreements, it involves participation in trade events, so on and so forth. So and more recently data sharing as well with Qantas. So aviation is critical. In India, we have partnerships with 3 airlines, a partnership marketing agreement with Singapore Airlines, Malaysia Airlines, and Air India. And what we're going to launch just on Monday is an industry-first initiative. We've got 8 airlines on board to launch an airline marketplace. So right from Singapore Airlines to Air India, to Thai, to Cathay, to Scoot, AirAsia, everyone's going to offer rock-bottom fares for travel to Australia, which will be valid until September 2017. And the objective is to make Australia the destination of choice. So this is how we intend to address that particular issue in terms of aviation, by giving people a compelling reason to travel to Australia. The second one was about, the second key challenge is about visas. Now, you may have the best campaign in market. You may love to spend as much as you want. You may have great aviation connectivity. You may have a pan-India presence. You may have the travel trade supporting you. But if the immigration guys are not happy with you and have an off day at work, all your efforts go down the drain. So realizing the importance of the visa facilitation services, exactly around 14 years ago, Tourism Australia launched a program called the Preferred Agency Scheme. Now, the Preferred Agency Scheme is a collaboration between Tourism Australia, around 100 agents in the country, and the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, where these 100 agents get priority visa processing. And what the agents need to do in return is the fact that they need to carry out all those due diligence and the sanity checks so that when they submit an application to the consulate, they're convinced about the genuineness and the authenticity of that particular applicant. So they carry out various checks, assess their financial documents, call the bankers, check their IT returns, and make a recommendation on something called as a green sheet, where we are satisfied that applicants, the application. You need for the checks to be done because there are, in India you get a lot of third-party and B2B bookings as well from remote places. So in case you're not sure about the candidate's profile, then you can refer it back to the High Commission, or you can just say dissatisfied because you're not happy with the creditworthiness of the financials which have been submitted by the applicant. So this program has been running successfully for the past 14-15 years. The turnaround time for these visa applications, while the standard processing time is 15 days, this is almost less than 24 hours in some cases during off-peak periods. And I guess we share a great rapport with the immigration. They've done a phenomenal job as far as the visa processing is concerned. The recent addition to this has been the electronic lodgement of visa application. So you do not have to submit the passport to either VFS or to the consulate. You need scanned copies of your IT returns, your 6 months bank statement, and the green sheet that needs to be uploaded directly by the agent. And that's the next step towards facilitating travel into Australia. So I guess aviation and access are two critical pillars of the overall India 2020 strategy.
Thanks, Nishant. Lots of best practices. And I will move that question to Sheetal. I'll just add another angle to that. The world order is changing, Sheetal, and besides the 4 factors that I earlier spoke about, I think terrorism and the unfortunate acts of terror in Paris and Nice both have impacted to some extent the imagery of France as a destination. So what is it that you are doing to overcome, as France Tourism, what is it that you're doing to overcome those challenges to make sure that India continues to send hordes of tourists across to France?
To start with, I would like to say that while you rightly said that these are unfortunate incidents that are out of our control, having said that, of course, they have impacted significantly the tourist inflow into France. India has not actually been shaken by these terror attacks. So I would like to begin with actually thanking the Indian travel fraternity for their support, as well as the media. We actually had tremendous support coming in from major stakeholders in the Indian travel industry, which helped us to not only stay steady, but also grow in these turbulent times. We actually had the biggest incentive movement into Paris of about 2,200 passengers, 3 weeks after the unfortunate attacks in Paris. After that, as I mentioned earlier, we had the first ever film shot in its entirety for 52 days in France. So India, by and large, has not been impacted, and I think the reasons for that are several. Having said that, like I said, other markets have been impacted. What we did as Atout France was, for instance, Japan, which had nosedived very significantly for us as a market. We invited JATA, who is the equivalent of one of the major committees of travel agents fraternities, who was invited by Atout France and the French government and was actually taken to the prefecture in Paris, shown the security measures that were being taken and undertaken for the tourists to reassure them of the various measures that were being undertaken. Various measures were deployed, and I think most importantly, they were disseminated in a very timely fashion through social media, through online initiatives, through the embassy and consular official channels, because I think in that state, the most important thing is to ensure that people are well informed and in a timely fashion, but most importantly in a factual manner. Unfortunately, sometimes, even though the media definitely apprises people, many times there are certain things that can be easily led to being misconstrued. So our endeavor was to really make sure that we keep the tourist and stakeholders in the industry up to speed through circulars, through information, and that was really all that we could do in that time. But we felt that even that helped us tremendously because it actually allowed for certain tour operators in India, for example, to reschedule certain departures, arrivals into Paris, and successfully managed. We actually had a lot of groups on ground on those days, and so we were constantly in touch with the tour leaders as well as the tour managers, tour operators, keeping them in sync with the different, so that there's no state of panic in the client's minds. And that's what we really did to ensure, because as you know, there's very little control that we have on these eventualities. So that is as far as terrorism goes. I think another huge challenge that we had as a country was visa as well. That was a big challenge. I remember in 2007, France was the only country to have gone the biometric way. And that had really penalized the destination, its image, as well as the inflow of its tourists, but primarily the incentives. After that, of course, in 2014, and I know that Mr. Menon, who's right here, will remember this incident. We had our then Minister of Tourism who was actually visiting India, and we were in a closed-door forum where we exposed him to the different challenges that we were facing in the Indian market, one of which being the visas, where he made an instant commitment to ensure delivery of visas within 48 hours. A commitment that worked out to be a game changer for us and something that we've managed to keep since. So starting January of 2015, France delivered visas in 48 hours through its 14 VFS centers, 4 consulates, and 1 embassy. After the biometric was reinstated on the 2nd of November in 2015, it actually turned out to become our biggest USP for the simple reason that it became an area of competence that France had through its experience, and the fact that we were one step ahead enabled us to be able to deliver in record time. And I think that worked out to be one of the best practices that we have installed since, and it has definitely worked favorably for us. Connectivity, of course, has never been an issue, but the other challenge I'd like to share is, of course, the imagery that you discussed. So we have been prey to that. France has been, for the longest time, been perceived as an expensive destination. This is despite the, rupee strengthening against the euro. I'm not talking about the particular current context of the demonetization, which is a complete aberration. But apart from that, I think the average disposable income having increased, France is still unfortunately perceived to be that. What we've done is gotten together with our suppliers in France and tried to instate a lot of deal-driven and value-for-money offerings, which we know appeal to the Indian clients and help them better understand or put the offerings into perspective. The other thing would be the lack of vegetarian cuisine available in France. Again, a huge myth, because there have been so many platforms on which I have been told, oh no, but we don't eat escargot and we don't eat frog legs. But you really don't have to do any of that. One of the biggest initiatives in that direction has been Goût de France, or Good France, the Taste of France, which has been a very successful initiative. It's a worldwide initiative, and India has really, again, supported it. We had 51 restaurants last year that actually patronized this movement, spearheaded by Alain Ducasse, who's, of course, as we know, really the be-all of cuisine and gastronomy in France. And we had, like I said, 51 restaurants that actually patronized this initiative. So that is one of the ways we encourage the restaurants to go out and flag off signature vegetarian menus. We had Rashmi Uday Singh, of course, who also wrote a book on vegetarian in Paris. And last but not the least, speaking in French and not being able to find people who speak to you in English in France. That's, again, one of the myths that we've tried to shatter. This is again something that we managed to do successfully over the years. Of course, it's a fact that today people do speak English in France, not just in Paris, but in various provinces. But what we've done to undertake initiatives, and we've borrowed for a slight moment Urs' brand ambassador for that. While he was in France, he did endorse to say that he very successfully managed to live through his 60 days without having to learn or speak a word of French. So I think all of these things have helped us in trying to break away from these traditional myths, and we hope to continue in that direction.